My name's Frank Coppersmith. I'm the CEO of a software company here in Austin called Smarter Reality, and I'm also the chair of Austin's Game Developers Association. I want to welcome all of you to the first time that we've had the IGDA's Game Leadership Conference here in Austin. Very excited to have the IGDA here, and hopefully we'll get them back here for over and over again for this conference. So my talk today is on transitions. It's about what happens when you get promoted. It's about what happens when your jobs change. It's about what happens when you get the job opportunity, career opportunity of a lifetime, and everybody is looking at you and nobody's telling you what to do. And you got to figure it all out on your own. And because that's kind of just how it is. And I was talking just recently to some folks from Retro, and they're like, yeah, that kind of sums up our experience too. And I tell you, it's not them, and it's not the game industry. It's everybody, and it's everywhere. It's that the sense is companies, organizations, teams, groups, nonprofits, heck, the IGDA, we all struggle from this. We all struggle from a lack of leadership. But it's not a lack of leadership that's driven by the fact that people are going out and becoming bad leaders, or they don't know how to be leaders, is that no one told them that their job changed. No one told them that they're no longer a QA tester, or they're no longer an individual contributor. Now there's something a little different. There's something a little special. They're a supervisor, they're a manager, they're a director, they're an executive, they're a functional head, they're a leader, they're a CEO, they're an enterprise manager, and wow, those are all different titles. Those are all different jobs, and they actually all have different roles, different rules, and different ways of working. So as I start off, I want to tell a story because it's important. You know, as you think about business, it's important that we understand that learning from your own experience is important, but learning from some other poor SOB's experience is awesome, and that's absolutely what you should all be trying to do. So we're going to start with me. So I'm going to start with my story, my first big leadership transition. See, I left the Air Force. I was in the Air Force for many years. I got out of the Air Force and got a job at DuPont. You've all heard of DuPont. They make chemicals. We made chemicals. That sounds really cool. It was a really neat job. I was going to be a customer service manager for DuPont. Thinking, hey, that sounds fun. That sounds really cool. I'm going to get to talk to customers. I got some employees. That's going to be a blast. So anyway, I show up my very first day, go in and talk to Tom Reed, who is my boss. He is the operations manager for this enormous DuPont facility. He says, Frank, there's about to be a big meeting. Why don't you come in there and I'll introduce you to your team. I said, that sounds great. So I go into this enormous room, one of those stadium seating kind of rooms, only a DuPont facility would bother building. We all kind of got in there. I'm in the front row, and he's just talking. I mean, it's a room of people. It is like this room of people in a stadium-style seating. But I didn't really know who was in the room. You see, I'm not really paying attention. I don't really quite understand. I just thought it was a bunch of people. So he's going through all these announcements, all these things, and he goes, and now let me introduce all of you to your new boss, Frank Coppersmith. Here he goes. Frank, come up and say a few words. That entire room was my department. I had 78 employees, 5 shifts, 3 sub-department managers, 7 supervisors. And up until that time, the most people I'd really managed was like me and like 3 or 4 other folks. And that's what I dropped into. And, the truth is, I probably didn't do too well that first year, maybe that first month. I mean, because what do you do? I'm just looking out at you. What do you do? What is your day like? Who do you talk to? I've got 7 supervisors. If I spend an hour with each supervisor every day, I have exactly 1 hour left from which to do work, which probably means I need to spend that hour with my boss. So what do I do? What's my day look like? What if I want to see my shifts? Well, my shifts ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That sounds a little bit like game development, doesn't it? But it is, and why did they do that? They did it because, of course, there's like $250 million in CapEx in that facility, and you certainly don't ever turn it off. You certainly don't ever need to get output out of it every day. So if I'm going to meet with every member of my shift, every shift supervisor, well, actually, I have to work 24 hours a day. Now, I can't work 24 hours a day, and neither can you. So that required me to step up and try to figure out, what am I going to do? And what this presentation is about, what we're going to cover, is not entirely everything I did then, but I'm going to talk to you a lot about the experiences that, that people go through when they go through these transitions, and how I basically started to apply some of those, not just in that role, but in some other roles. So as we look ahead to this presentation over the next 2 hours that we have, because we've got an hour, then we're going to take a break. And during that break, I encourage all of you, please go next door. Right next door in room 16 is all of our sponsors. They're the people who have paid for us to be able to have this. Please go in and thank them. Please go in and thank the sponsors. So I'll just ask you to do that. But we've got that, then we've got another hour following it. So this talk is broken into 3 pieces. The first piece is all about the transitions. We're going to talk about the different transitions you are going to encounter in your career. Right now, many of you, let me ask, how many of you have a role you consider to be an individual contributor? You work alone for yourself. Okay, good. That's helpful. Because that first transition is the one we're going to be spending a lot of time on, that transition from individual contributor to supervisor, or individual contributor to lead, or maybe individual contributor to manager. Because that is the one that trips most people up, and it's the one that if you don't get it right, you don't get another. It becomes your last one. Because the one thing that's important about all of these transitions is when they occur, all eyes are on you. And you're thinking, okay, what does that mean, Frank? What's that mean? It means that when you're a brand new supervisor, a brand new manager, when you first walk in and you've got your brand new flashy business cards that say supervisor or lead, well, what do you know? You're making decisions for the first time that don't just affect you. It affects the people you work for. It affects the peers around you. It affects your manager and your manager's manager and the organization that you work for in ways that an individual contributor you have not had happen before. And so suddenly, just about the time you're getting the challenge of a lifetime, no help and no mentoring, we're going to drop the spotlight on you. Well, that's kind of rough. That's kind of rough. So this talk, the first half of this talk, first big tranche of this talk is going to be about how do you deal with that? What do those look like? Then the next one is we're going to dive into some real life examples, some things that you will encounter, and I'm going to presume this, as a new supervisor, lead, manager, whatever it is. We're going to talk about them, and it's things like, oh my gosh, I'm spending a lot of time in meetings. Is that right? Or wait a second, I have a phone call, I have a phone message from the general counsel or the chief financial officer. You know, you probably don't get those as an individual contributor. The day you pick up supervisor or manager is the day suddenly you're playing with the big boys and girls. And that first day you get a phone message, and I got one of those, probably about my 3rd day in, from the executive vice president and controller of DuPont, because there was a question about my budget, a budget I'd never read, I didn't see and didn't have a copy of and didn't know where I'd even find it. You know, that's a moment that, you know, that's a powerful moment for you and one you have to step up to and be ready for. So we're going to talk through those examples. Then the last piece of this presentation, we're going to drive into some of the myths, some of the things that you may have been told, some of the things you may think, some of the things you may see, and I'm going to dispel some. I might confirm a few. It's not quite Mythbusters. But we're going to dive into some of the things that I think people believe that aren't necessarily true, at least as I think people believe them. And then that'll be our talk for today. So let's dive into a little more here. So this is me. This is me and my co-founder. We have a startup here in Austin. We make all kinds of software on mobile and desktop, including mobile games, which makes up about half of our business. We love e-commerce too. But what I really want to show here are just some of the companies that he and I have worked for, because I talked to him a lot about this deck. I mean, we've got all kinds of good companies there, NCSoft and Zynga and DuPont and Disney. And then between him and I, we have held all those roles on the left side. I've personally been a chief financial officer, a chief operations officer, general manager, general counsel, customer service manager, an attorney, and he's been an engineer, a producer, a chief executive officer, and a corporate founder. And as well as, of course, we've both been individual contributors. And so when you look at that, you know, it doesn't mean that I know all the things, because I assure you, I do not. But it does mean that I've seen lots of transitions. I've lived through lots of transitions. And importantly, in some of these roles, I've made the choice of choosing people to go through the transition. Because the other piece that you might be able to take away from this presentation is how to position yourself if you're an individual contributor or a junior supervisor. How do you position yourself so that senior leadership believes and is confident that you are the person to be tapped for the next open leadership role. It's important. It's important. Not only is it important to you because you want to get promoted, if you in fact do want to get promoted, but there's nothing worse than actually being ready to be promoted, feeling comfortable in that role, and not knowing how to signal it appropriately. Not knowing the vocabulary you need to say so that managers, executives, C-suite staff recognize that you're ready. So we're going to talk some about that too. But the real question for all of you is, why are you here? And I asked that because, and I thought we were going to have a little bit smaller group, and I was going to go out in the audience and talk to people, so I may call on people. You know, this title, this talk has the word terrible in the title. And when I wrote it, it made sense to me, but now I'm in this place where I don't know that I would go to a talk that had the word terrible in the title. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So here's the question. Why are we all here? Why would you come to this and not the other one? So I want someone just to answer that. You're very close. Tell me, why did you come today, sir?
Because I've managed teams before, and will probably be managing a team again soon, and I want to level up my skills.
Excellent. So someone who's been a manager and is expecting to be a manager. Someone else. Who else wants to say? I'm going to get you, ma'am.
I managed and trained a team and got passed over for a promotion, and one of the people I trained, I then had to train into the management promotion.
Oh, that hurts. I'm feeling that one. So, I mean, there isn't enough burn salve for that. So you trained a team, and somebody you trained got picked over you.
And then I had to train her into the management position.
And then she said, had to train her into the new management position. Ooh, okay, we've got some things to talk about then. This will be good. This will be good. There's someone else here who wants to talk.
I'm in a pretty new role. I've been a manager previously, but I changed industries completely. So I'm no longer in software. I'm back in games.
Okay, so back in games. Okay, excellent. I think it's interesting because gaming has its own very special flavor, its own special flavor of leadership. We're going to talk about a case study. And of course, all my case studies are like disasters. Okay, just so you know, because hearing good case studies, even though you can learn a lot from them, they're not nearly as much fun to talk about. So all my case studies are like catastrophes, and only about half of them involve me. So it is what it is. So anyone else? Other reasons why you came here, sir?
I'm in the middle of the transition from IC to manager.
Okay, so you are literally living the dream right now. You are living it. You're in the middle of this challenge. Okay, excellent. And it's terrible. Like no kidding, just so we're clear, it is actually terrible. There's a reason for it. I've changed jobs many times. Everyone has its own flavor. I feel like I could have done, every time I've looked back at every one of them, I thought, man, I could have done that 100 times better, but managed to get through it. Other questions? So maybe in the back. William?
I'm one of those individual contributors who has a lot of, or thinks about all of the myths of what it would be like, and I'm interested in trying to learn more about that to position myself in the future.
Got it. So worried about myths and wants to position themselves for the future. We'll do one more, and we'll do two more. We'll do these two right here.
Obviously, there's a lot that I need to learn, too, for this transition, because I also started as an IC for games, but at the same time, I want to start building a culture within our company so others don't have to go through that as well. So knowing kind of what the caveats and what the surprises are so I can help nurture the guys going forward.
Yeah, so if you got that, it's the idea of building a culture around it. That's a big deal. A lot of what we talk about, some of the books I'm going to refer to specifically speak to that, because one of the things that we don't do as an industry, one of the things that we don't do a lot of places is grow our own. So we always end up looking for other folks. So this will be our last question. Or last comment.
I'm transitioning to CEO of the company that I work for, and taking over for a very long-standing founder. So a lot of challenges there, and also building and growing the team and sort of setting the vision and focus moving forward.
Okay, that hits like every hot button. Every possible way that could go wrong, that could go wrong, right? We got a founder that you're replacing. Is the founder still going to own the company? Yes. So you're going to work for the person who used to have that job. Okay. All right. So, yeah, we may need a whole separate session just for you, just to get through this. Okay. So let's move on. So let's talk. Let me see. Oops, hang on. Gotta catch up. So first of all, if you go on the internet and search for things like bad leaders, holy moly. You would think that there literally has never been a decent or competent leader anywhere. If you try to filter for game industry, it don't get no better, because we aren't necessarily known for always having the most, the most rational, competent leadership teams. Myself included. Hey, I'm in this too. I don't think about it. So the question is, where do these bad leaders come from, and what really is bad leadership? So I'm just going to ask one or two questions. Who wants to just give me a quick thing? What makes a bad leader? Why is someone a bad leader? Why is someone on that chart? Maybe someone over here. Anyone want to say about bad leadership? They aren't a listener. That's a good one. They aren't a listener. I'm going to do one more. Give me one more reason someone might be a bad leader. They blame other people. Okay. This is too much fun. I got to keep going. Renee? Aren't invested in the growth of the people they manage. So they're bad listeners. They want all the credit for themselves. They aren't invested in their employees. Okay, I'll do one more because this is simply too much fun. We got any more? Ma'am?
They are out of touch with what's actually happening versus what they want to happen versus what they think is happening.
Oh yeah, they're out of touch with what's happening. So they have that the eternal optimism of insanity. Is that how you call that, right? It's always going to be okay, and it's always going to work out. I mean, we've all worked for that person. I've worked for that person many times. If you work in a small startup, if you work in a small business, my co-founder worries that I am a little bit about that, right? You got to be an eternal optimist, but it can also make people around you crazy when they're not seeing reality. So here's the thing. I agree with all those things. They're all good tactical descriptions of what is wrong, but I think, especially in the game industry, it's more foundational, it's more fundamental. And it's back to this sense of, we just don't do transitions at all. So here's an example, right? It is not at all unreasonable to think that someone could be an individual contributor today, go out, start a studio, have some moderate success, suddenly are talking to publishers and leaders about enormous amounts of funding, 7-figure funding, quadrupling the size of their studio, and a global rollout. That's not at all impossible. That's not all possible. Talk to the folks that did Firewatch. What did that go from? A little bit to everything overnight? That's amazing. Interesting enough, they came out of Telltale Games, which is going to be one of our case studies today. And the thing is, with that issue, with that sense of lack of transition, that inability to understand what new role I'm doing, that's where I think your lack of understanding comes, the lack of listening, the lack of buy-in and helping your employees. That's where it comes from. That's where it comes from, because they don't know they should be doing it. And we can say you should do it, but saying you should do it and having the actual value that you understand that that's actually important in what you do is a very different thing. So as I look ahead here, I have this amazing slide about traits of a bad leader, which we hit. And it's all of these things. But here's the thing. I look at this and I think to myself, I violate these even when I'm trying to do things right. I mean, let's face it. I mean, come on, folks. When I'm really busy, am I always appropriate with feedback? Do I always, do I come to work every day with the same level of passion and commitment? I don't know. Maybe I got a cold today and I'm not feeling it. What about, do I always trust all my folks? Do I sometimes feel this is so important I have to step in and do it myself? Maybe. Yeah, it's all about them. But I'm telling you, if you're an entrepreneur, if someone steps up and creates their own company, their own studio, come on, you got to carry some ego to do that. You gotta. Because if you don't, you just be working for someone else, right? So you've got some of these bad traits in there. Integrity, I tend to think that that's kind of a non-negotiable one. Dishonest people are always bad leaders. That's one you can't really run around. Then not support the team. Well, what if the team isn't performing? I mean, there's all kinds of questions here. These like this to me isn't enough. This doesn't tell me what I should do. What I should praise people a lot. Well, that's tactical, right? What to do? I should have more passion. What? I don't know how to pull all this together to be better at my job. to be better at leading my team. So let's talk about what we might be able to do to try to do that. So I grabbed this off the internet because I thought to myself, this is like the worst pop culture example of leadership I could find. Literally, it is absolutely the dumbest thing I have ever seen. And I had to put it on here because it only gives you two leadership choices. You're going to either be Yoda or you're going to be Mr. Skinner. And that is absolutely ridiculous because leadership falls across an incredibly wide spectrum of different types and things. It's also kind of ridiculous because look at what you have to do to be a good leader. I mean, I got to read this. You have to be humble, okay? You have to influence, okay? Be democratic, stimulate, serve others, listen, inspire, empower, support, and is courageous. Thank you, Captain America, for that, right? I mean, who can step up and do that? I mean, come on, folks. Do you think I do that? I don't care how much coffee I have in a day. Do you think I hit those numbers? Do you think I've ever hit those numbers? I've done that. No, of course not. Now, am I on the other side? Am I always arrogant? Am I always authoritarian? Are we always blaming other people, abandoning? Am I weak? No, of course not. Not all the time. Not all the time. So my point on this is, as we start talking about leadership and as we start talking about these transitions, I want you to kind of take this pop culture sense of leader and ignore it. This isn't what I'm talking about. Because trying to tell someone that they should be courageous, personal opinion, is absolutely ridiculous. I can't tell you to become courageous. That's silly. But what I can tell you to do is this. This is what I can tell you all about. And I'm going to come here and I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to jump ahead. What I can tell you is this. We're going to come back to those slides, but I just want to hit this now. What I can tell you to do is to value different things. What I can tell you to do is to develop different skills. And what I can tell you to do is to look at the way you appreciate time, both time management and time scale, and do it differently. So let me define this a little bit for you. And then we're going to go back to some of those other things. So as you move through various levels of promotion, the skills that you have learned in the past may not get you where you need to be. They're not necessarily the skills you need. So for example, you become a supervisor. You know, when you were an individual contributor, it didn't matter whether you knew how to run a meeting or not. But boy, you become a supervisor, you better know how to run a meeting because that might be half your day and it might be effectively the most important part of your job. So the interesting question is, as you move ahead, what skills do you need to adapt? We're going to talk about those. But I also want to call to attention to this little chart on the left side. It talks about these critical transitions around skills, tasks, beliefs, all kinds of things. You'll note that there are some choices here. You can keep a skill that you've had in the past as you move through a transition. You can add new skills and other elements. But there's another piece, and I got to talk about it. You know, if I could sing, I would sing the Frozen song, but I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times. It's about let it go. It's about what are you going to let go of? So you see, as you move from individual contributor to manager or to supervisor to manager, some of the things that you've gotten really good at that got you there, some of the things you really maybe enjoy doing, some of the things you really care about, you know what? They're not important anymore. Doesn't matter. You imagine being a QA tester, and we're going to talk about this in a bit. You imagine being a QA tester, being a great QA tester, being amazing at it, and now you're a QA lead. You maybe got 10 QA people working for you, and now it doesn't matter how good you are at finding a bug. What matters is how good you are at getting other people to find those bugs on your behalf. And your job becomes, you know, the messaging, the communication, the training, the reporting. So what's important about that, so I'm talking about these things around the values you have, and we're going to talk about what, it's not just like values like democracy and freedom. It's about what you think is important, where you put your effort. What you think, like for example, if you get a supervisor, is it important to you that you're good at running a meeting? It's a skill. You got to learn how to run a meeting. It doesn't come for free. It's just like learning to code. Well, it's probably a little easier than learning to like C++, but still it is something you have to learn to do. So do you take the time to learn that? Same thing with time application. How much time should I dedicate to various things? And of course, the skills I have to have. So that is kind of where we're going to be heading for this first hour. But I want to go back because I skipped over something that is just way too much fun to give up. and that is this. So this is Telltale Games and The Walking Dead, and that is their former CEO, Kevin, and I believe it's pronounced Bruner. Some of you may know him or know of him or have heard that name, but that's how I understand it's pronounced. So if you're not familiar with the story of Telltale Games and Mr. Bruner, it's an interesting one. So in 2012, the Walking Dead game, built by their fairly small studio, whose mission was to kind of reinvigorate storytelling games. And let me make it clear, that is exactly the kind of dream mission that most game people want to have. Most gamers want to do something amazing, like reinvigorate an entire genre or build a award-winning game. Well, that's what they did. They went out and they built the Walking Dead episodic storytelling game, and it won the Spike Video Game Award Game of the Year, beating such really awful games as Dishonored and Mass Effect 3. So it was a pretty darn good game. So winning that award allowed them to go out and raise an enormous amount of money. They quadrupled the size of the studio. They found just a ton of new IPs that wanted to work with them. Little ones like Batman, Game of Thrones, Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, this is win all day long. Seems like they're on the right path. Everything's going good. Yeah, well, just 3 years later, excuse me, Mr. Bruner was literally slinking out of the office for the very last time with his backpack, having been told by the board that his time was up. Soon after, a new CEO came in and laid off not quite half the company. So what happened? What happened to Mr. Bruner? How did so much promise turn so wrong and so quickly in just 3 years? Well, here's some quotes. I want to read these quotes because they are simply too good. Let me read this one here. I'm not going to read them all. Employees compared Bruner's attention to that of the eye of Sauron. And here's the board quote. The eye of Sauron looks at you. That beam of light just blows everything up and makes it a hellscape. A hellscape where you don't believe in a thing you're building anymore. Ooh. Another quote. Yeah, you go into an executive review and they take a giant turd on you. That's not the word they use, but that'll be appropriate for us. The feedback you get was, we hate this thing you made. One of his quotes is, I love that we can just shout at each other. And the last piece. Well, he wanted to be consulted on everything, from the color of the walls to who they hired to write specific dialogue. Okay. So what happened? What happened to Mr. Bruner? Well, one of the things that I didn't read is there are other very positive quotes about Mr. Bruner. Very positive quotes. But none of those quotes talk about him running the studio. They talk about his almost unmatched technical expertise. He was without a doubt the best engineer at Telltale. Even people who were other very senior engineers said he was absolutely the best. On top of it, he was seen as also having a very strong design aesthetic and a great connection to the players, and did an amazing job on some of the key elements that made this game so special. They were his. He came up with them. So what happened? What happened to Mr. Bruner? Well, I have a theory. Because, I mean, someone like him, I mean, how does this guy get to be CEO? I mean, he doesn't look like Sauron, right? He doesn't look like the spawn of darkness. He looks like a reasonably nice guy. So what happened to him? What happened to him is he got promoted too fast and no one told him what to do. He woke up one day, the story is when Telltale was first building this game and building some of their earlier games, it was a small studio. They didn't have a lot of resources. His day-to-day was split between doing certain engineering work and a little bit of outside kind of CTO and then CEO work, and he didn't really get involved in the day-to-day. And he wasn't really responsible for all that. And then eventually, as they grew to over 300 employees, he got more and more into it. So what happened? He failed in the transition. He failed in the transition because he jumped from basically very senior individual contributor, maybe supervisor or manager, all the way to CEO. He didn't know how to be CEO. Maybe he shouldn't have been a CEO. Maybe he didn't even want to be a CEO. We really don't know. What we do know is that Mr. Bruner failed spectacularly and publicly Remember what I said earlier about the spotlight being on you? This guy's got the spotlight on you. I mean, if you go Google his name, that's all, this article and all the other stuff around it is all you find. And you know, it's probably not fair to him. It's probably not fair to him. And I say it's not fair to him because where was the board in counseling their new CEO? Where were the investors in helping their new CEO grow? Why didn't anyone anywhere in that organization say, you know, Kevin, you probably need some counseling or some training or some assistance? And no one gave him that. So that's one of the reasons we're here. It's one of the reasons we're here to have this conversation, but it's not just the game industry. Here's another one. Here's a guy who had been CFO. In my understanding, from what I read, was he had been CFO at Coca-Cola for decades. He'd been inside the Coca-Cola organization for decades. I don't know if he'd been CFO that whole time. He was a natural choice to become the CEO in '97. Perfect candidate. And he failed spectacularly again, just like Kevin Bruner. And why? Well, here's the quote. Let me see, read it here. He was promoted because he had this extraordinary attention to detail. And, you know, if you're the chief financial officer, that's pretty natural. That's kind of what you're looking for. But the challenge was that had been a virtue in his previous jobs, but he couldn't free himself from day-to-day ops to step up and do the strategic things that are needed to do to be a CEO, because being a CEO is not the same as being a CFO. Those are really different jobs. So there you go. So what's that mean? What's that mean for us? It means for us is that many of our leaders, our managers, ourselves, are working at what I would call the wrong level. We're supervisors, but we're really just super individual contributors. We're maybe the best IC, but we're not doing work to help our coworkers, our employees work better. We're still clinging to values, and then we still value the things that got us promoted, becoming, being a great engineer or a great QA tester or a great artist. We're not valuing the things we need to value as we move up the chain. So 2 quick examples, then we're going to dive into a lot more detail. The first, I call this the can't let it go example. The can't let it go example is all about an engineer. He gets promoted. Why does he get promoted? Because he is the best. He is the technically superior. And he's been a hands-on engineer his whole life. Man, he gets into the code and fixes it. It's what he's good at, it's what he's comfortable with. He's always about finding the solution on his own. The problem is, when you make him a supervisor, he's now competing with his direct reports. As a supervisor, his role is to help other direct reports succeed, other people. He's to get work done through other people. But he's not. He's getting work done through himself and actually making it harder for his direct reports to do the job. In my opinion, that is the most common problem. That is the challenge at the first turn from individual contributor to supervisor. But it's not the only one. The next one is, I call it the cannot move on example. The can't move on example is all about someone maybe a little more senior in the organization. This is when you've been promoted and now you actually maybe have some responsibility for profit and loss. Maybe you've got a division that you're overseeing. You're higher up in the organization. But you really struggle coming up with value for the parts of the organization that you haven't worked with before. So let's say you come up through engineering. You might think engineering is the most important thing in the company. Quality assurance might disagree. Design might disagree. Art might disagree. Live ops might disagree. Lots of people might disagree. The thing is, now that you're overseeing this department, maybe you're overseeing a bunch of those folks, you have to find a way to value these other departments and people you don't necessarily know, people you haven't necessarily worked with directly. You've only seen them as those annoying people in production. True story, I worked at a company which will go blameless and nameless for now. And we hired a new CTO, very talented CTO. But I knew we had a problem, and the first thing he told me was, I don't know why we have all these producers. At the time, we had 2 engines, 3 engines, 2 clients, and more products than you can count, all built by the same dev team. Why did we have 4 producers? Because we had like a gajillion things going on, and they were all conflicting, and we needed him to keep track of them, and he just couldn't value that. He didn't understand that value. So as we move on, I want to come up to one more thing. So I get a lot of this stuff from this book. If you do nothing today, take a picture of this slide and go buy this book at Half Price Books for like $3. I have used this book at every single job I have been at. I have used it for every single job interview I have ever prepped for since about 2000. And it all comes down to basically doing two things: helping you make transitions. And then the last piece is, if you are responsible for an organization, this book tells you how to build a system that will help your employees make those transitions. Oh, that's exciting. So this is the one thing I haven't done a really good job of in my own career, is really necessarily building a system that'll grow my employees. I've helped individual employees, but I always haven't had the bandwidth to do this. That's my dream one day, is to run a business where I can really do this. But it's really that framework for helping to prove future leaders, train future leaders, raise them up, and measure whether they're doing the right things. All right, so let's get to the good meat of this presentation. So I've talked a lot about transition. And I apologize. I hope everyone can see this. If you can't, I guess that letter should have been white. So what this looks at is the different levels of leadership. There are seven defined levels of leadership. Starting at the bottom with individual contributor, then you move up to first line manager. Maybe you're a supervisor or a lead. Then you move up and you become a manager of managers. You see other managers who work for you. Then you move up and you may own a particular function. You may be the QA, head of QA, or the head of engineering. You then might own a business. You actually might have P&L over a studio or over an entire game. Then you move up and you might own a bunch of games or multiple studios. And finally, you might move all the way up and be a CEO at the enterprise level. Now you're thinking, okay, Frank, none of us or a few of us are ever going to be, a business manager, a group manager, or even an enterprise manager. Why are we talking about those? So I'm talking about them for two reasons. First off, many of you have a desire at some point to run your own studios or start your own studios. So you have to power through these transitions, because you might find yourself doing 3 or 4 of these roles at the same time. And we're going to talk about that at the very end, what it means to be a small organizational lead. But the other piece to it, the other piece is, you'll be a better employee and a better lead and a better supervisor if you actually understand the problems and the challenges of what's happening above. If you really understand why your chief executive is making some of these choices, or worse, why they failed in the transition that they're going through, why they have not succeeded, and you're like, oh gosh, I know exactly why we're failing. I can see it. But what we're going to talk about are not the individual roles. We're actually going to talk about the passages. So you see here, it really matters. This passage from individual contributor to first line manager to manager of managers, and then manager of managers to functional managers. That's where we're going to put our time, because these are huge, huge steps. I mean, these are the major events in your life as a leader, and getting that right is how you unlock other opportunities. I want to make it clear, you can spend years as a first line manager, but if you hosed up the passage from individual contributor to first line manager, you will never recover from that. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Everybody like, oh my God. But there's a truth to it. You carry the reputation you build from day one. And whether you're a successful manager, a successful leader, a successful executive, honestly, they've kind of figured that out in about the first 120 days, 180 days. I'm not saying it can't ever be changed if you spend enough time somewhere, but when you hear about people who get promoted and promoted and promoted and promoted, it's not that so much that they're doing a great job at each level, it's that they're just getting it right so quickly. They're not taking 3-4 years to get it right. They're getting it right in 90 to 120 days. And that's powerful. That's the success in the transition. That's what I'm hoping I'm going to leave you with a little bit here. So back to our key focus, right? What else do I want you to take away from this today? So with each of these transitions, at each transition, and we're going to talk about each one in turn, there are 3 things I want you to think about. How you spend your time. How you spend your time, because how you spend your time as an individual contributor is radically different than how you would do it as a business manager. The second is what you value. What do you value? And what you value is reflected in what you choose to do and what you choose to think is important as part of your day. And then the last piece is what skills do you exhibit? What skills do you have to develop? What skills do you have to perform? Okay, you got those three. So let's move on to some other pieces. So from a career standpoint, this is what it might look like. Again, the letter's a little small. We'll make sure this deck is somewhere everyone can get it. So this is a quality assurance or software testing role, and it looks like what your career development might be in QA. You might start on the left side as a tester, described as an entry-level position, focused heavily on test execution. And then what's interesting, and the reason I put this slide up here, is when you look at each of those little job descriptions, I couldn't find anything else that was better at showing they're different. They're different. They all have software tester or analyst, or it's like tester, test, team lead, test consultant, senior test consultant, principal test consultant. They all say test. Not one of these jobs is the same. So your tester is an entry-level position that focuses heavily on execution. By the time you're over here at the end, you're leading complex projects, defining and implementing test strategies, playing a pivotal role in client and staff support and development. Wow, do these even sound even remotely the same? Man, they're not even close. They are radically different. These jobs, the only thing they have in common is they have the word test in them. Okay? They are radically different. And the skills, what is it? The skills, let me get my notes here. I want to see exactly right. The skills, the values, and how you spend your time is different in every single one of those buckets in a big material way. Okay, now that we got that, let's move on to some other good stuff. Oh, one more last thing. I don't think this is a big deal. It's pretty obvious over time, and if you can see this chart, the x-axis down here goes from individual contributor to manager to executive, and importance is on the y-axis. You can see that things like leadership skills grow over time, managerial skills grow and then slowly decline, and then, and I think this is the big one, technical skills, of which all of us are very and rightfully proud if you're an artist or engineer or whatever you are, decline. Which means it is less important as your technical skills as you advance through the ranks. Okay? Now we're going to go over to the slide I was trying to get to. Okay, I've already hit that one. So let's talk about being an individual contributor. I want to start here because, and this is very important, I absolutely think it is entirely legitimate for everyone to think, you know what? I can just stay an individual contributor. I can keep doing what I'm doing because I like it. Who does that, right? An artist? An engineer? Programmer? Someone who wants to be known for their technical skills. I have a law degree, oddly, and I do, and most lawyers value themselves on the arcane, exotic, strange laws that they know, the deep specialties they exhibit, whether it's mergers and acquisitions law, environmental law, tax, contracts, corporate law. They develop deep specialties and they get paid a lot of money for that specialty. That's bank right there, right? But the catch, of course, is they're not being asked to work across, work cross-functionally across different teams. They're brought in as mercenaries to solve problems. They do a task. That's really what we have here when you look at what an individual contributor does. It's about technical skills. It's task focus. You follow somebody else's direction. You work alongside team members and you're recognized. And this is important. You are recognized for your individual contribution. Why do I say it and foot stomp it? The day you become a lead, the day you become a supervisor or a manager you will never be recognized solely because of your individual contribution again. From that point on, it is always about the impact you have on other people, whether it's your peer level managers. It's always about the metrics that you deliver because you will have KPIs, key performance indicators as a supervisor, or your budget. It will be the work you get done through others. So here's the thing, if you really like being recognized, right here on this last bullet, for your individual contribution, then okay, you're done. You don't need to listen to the rest of this, right? Because and you know what? And stay right where you are, and that will make you happy. I can't tell you, so back to one of my DuPont stories. I had a supervisor who worked for me at DuPont, and he was struggling. He was a great guy. I mean, just a nice guy. People liked him a lot. He just did not know how to be a supervisor. And one day he just confessed to me, he's like, I just really like being a customer service rep. He goes, he was upset. He's like, before I got promoted, I repped the 2 biggest customers in our company. We fixed that. I said, I'll get you those customers back. And got him back in that role and found someone who actually wanted to be a supervisor to supervise that department. So you got to think about it. I mean, when we talk about leadership, we talk about these promotions, it may not be for you. Can you get passionate? Can you value the work that other people do and think that's important and think that that's what you want to contribute to and that's what you want to help? So ask yourself that. That's why I started with this slide. So here's the next piece. So here is the first transition. And I have like 2 full pages of like micro font on this one, so sorry about it. Because this is the one that probably most matters. This is the one that most matters. By the way, for folks who are taking pictures of these slides, that's great. Please do so. That's awesome. I will find a way to get these slides available. But I'm also a very lazy person. Most of these slides, from one way or another, came from SlideShare, because this kind of talk is all over SlideShare. And it must not yet be working because we're still struggling with leadership, right? So maybe it takes that repetition. You got to hear it 5 times. So, but you can find lots and lots of good stuff on SlideShare on this topic and on this book, on the Leadership Pipeline book. So here's the thing. When you came in as an individual contributor, your skill set was technical, it was professional, you did work, and you got credit for doing that work. Your goal was to get your work done on time, and you valued basically just working with others. You valued collaboration. And then I make you a supervisor, and now you've got 10 people working for you. And the challenge you will face, and I kind of said it, but I want to say it again because you got to hear it. Whatever you've been doing that made you the most successful individual contributor, the best QA tester, the best artist, whatever it is, when you become a lead, that work, what you've been doing, is not what you need to keep doing. And this is why this transition is simply so difficult. It is incredibly hard to let go and stop doing things that you were good at. Back to my DuPont days, not long after I got the job, I had to write an email to my boss. Of course, at the time, I'd previously been a lawyer, so I know how to write. Man, I can write, right? I can write and write and write. So I sent him this long thing, and I sent it to him. Yeah, about an hour later, he stops by my office. He's like, he printed it out, and he goes, this looks great. I didn't read it, of course, because I don't have nearly enough time. He goes, he goes, I don't read anything past the 3rd bullet point. I'm simply too busy. Well, it makes sense, right? The plant did $12 million a month in revenue. He had 450 employees. He has, I think, 14 subordinate managers. We all had 5 to 7 supervisors. I mean, do the math, right? He is a busy man. Oh, and he is a peer. How many DuPont factories were there? I mean, a couple hundred. So think of his peer groups, all the meetings he attends. He's like, I got time for 3 bullets. So let me help you with that. But I had to stop doing what had got me where I was. I was a great writer. I like to write. I like to write long, detailed, thorough explanations. Won't work. Won't work in the future. So that's the thing. So that's the first piece. So what's the other stuff? So what should you be doing? So you got to shift from doing work to getting work done through other people. But I've said that. Some other things, though, and I think this might be the most important. We talk about value. What you value. You have to value being a manager. You have to value the work of being a manager. And that value is something we're going to talk about, actually, what the work of being a manager is. And as we talk about it, and you'll be like, I got to learn to value all that crap. Yes, you do. All the stuff you get pulled into that you don't like, and it's budgets, and it's talks with the lawyers, and it's training and recruiting and hiring and planning and all that stuff that you despise with a passion. Well, you know what? You have to stop despising it. It matters. It matters. Remember, I went back to the very first story. I said I got a call from like someone high up in DuPont's financial group. The reason was there hadn't been anybody in my role for a long time, so they were really behind on this budget. Man, I was holding up their budgets. This is a public company. They have quarterly filing reports they must do. These are not negotiable. These are not debatable. You can't say, well, I just got here. No, I worked with my team all day to get that done because we were holding up the public reporting. And you don't get to hold up the public reporting. I certainly don't want to be my name attached to the fact that the public reporting got held up. So you have to value things that maybe you haven't had to value before. The other piece to it is a sense of planning. So as an individual contributor, planning is basically your to-do list, or maybe what you find in Trello, or what you find in any of the other management tools. I won't use the name because I hate it. But that's planning, right? Just give me my Trello tasks and I'll get on it. But as a supervisor, as a lead, that's not what planning is. Planning is looking at what your team is, who your team is made up of, what their skills are, what their abilities are, what their interests are, what their availability is, what their vacation schedule is. Yes, now you own the vacation schedule. That was the biggest hassle. 4 years at DuPont, the absolute bane of my existence was two things: the temperature in the main room where all my employees worked and the vacation schedule. And of the two, the temperature was the worst by far. It was literally 10 minutes every day, every single day. But you have to have some value for that, right? So you say we all laugh at that. It's silly, right? But there are people who are unhappy because of that. And if they're unhappy and uncomfortable, well, they're not as productive. They're not working as good. They're going to be cranky about it. They're the people talking to our customers who give us money. So you laugh, right? We all laugh. Ha ha. It's funny that it's uncomfortable in that room. It's quite possible the work I did on that improved our sales. And that sounds silly, but it's absolutely the case because that really matters, right? Those hygiene factors can really matter. So that's really what you're looking for. Can you feel comfortable directing the work of others? Can you feel comfortable with the work of others reflecting you? Remember what I said? The work these other people are doing are a reflection on you. You're not longer reflecting the light. It's someone else's. So are you comfortable with that? You have to tell me. So let's move to the next one. And then I think we break at 2:30. Is that right? Is that what my schedule says we break at 2:30? Okay. We'll get through a couple more of these so I have plenty of time. So this next one, managing managers. Oop, I gotta go a little further. Managing managers. So this is, if becoming a supervisor for the first time is the most difficult passage, in my opinion, this is possibly one of the ones that is really life-changing. When you become that supervisor, you become that lead, even though you're probably going to be doing mostly or heavily management work, you might still be doing some individual contributor work. It's just the nature of a lot of organizations. If you're a supervisor or a lead, you're the lead QA tester, you're probably still doing some QA. The day you get this job, the day you are a manager or maybe a director, and you have managers working for you. And what I mean by that, people who work for you, your direct reports have direct reports, right? You're a couple levels into the organization. For the first time, you are what I would describe as pure management. You are, in fact, the man. The person that everyone blames for everything going wrong. You are now that first person's first line representative. And so it's hard. It's hard because it means there's a whole bunch of changes you have to do. And I think there's two big ones that really jump out at me. The first is now it's on your head to pick the subordinate supervisors. Absolutely the most difficult thing for me at DuPont and elsewhere. It's not board meetings. Nope. Not board meetings, not strategy. It's figuring out who I should make in charge of different departments and different organizations. And one of the reasons for that, and we were talking about that with someone here, is how do you signal that you're ready? Because I really want you to signal that you're ready. I really want you to tell me that you're ready to step up to that. But the problem is, we've gone through all this stuff here, all these important transitions, all these different changes in values and skills and time management, but people don't signal that they're ready for it. So that makes it really hard on me. And if you get this kind of job, it's going to be really hard for you. The second piece is going to be this other one. And I think this is one of the ones that will be a real challenge for you. Again, it's a bit of a challenge for me. Managing and evaluating management is really hard. If all you do is manage, that means you look at budgets, you decide kind of who does what work, you're responsible and accountable for outputs. That is, how do you evaluate people on that? How do you know if this supervisor is better than some other supervisor? Because you know what? Now that's your job. Now that's your job to figure that out. Is this supervisor better than this other supervisor? Well, I mean, when you have individual contributors working for you, when you're that lead role, you've had that role before probably. And when you've had that role before, you kind of know it, right? You could probably tell if you're an engineering lead who the best engineers are in your group. You know that. Now you're a manager of managers. You're 2 or 3 levels away from those engineers. The supervisors working before you are spending about half their time doing supervision and management. So how are you going to evaluate them? Maybe some KPIs? Maybe some structure? I don't know. What are you going to do? That's going to be one of the biggest challenges that you're going to face. And then the last one, it really comes down, because one of the things that we look to is coaching. And the coaching is just so incredibly critical, because the supervisors are your extension of your will. They do what you ask them to do. They will lead the way you lead. They will mirror back to you and to their own staff the behaviors you exhibit. So the question for you as you go through this is, how are you going to adapt to that? How are you going to step up and do that? Because this is the role I landed in at DuPont when I was talking about that job where I suddenly had 78 employees with no notice and had no idea and should have asked for a lot more money, because they didn't really tell me that, but I should have. That's what it looks like. That's what that job looks like. Okay? So let's move on to the next one here, and then we will take a break, because we're getting to the break time. Okay. In fact, we might just do 2 more slides, because I think we've got time for that. So this functional manager one is really interesting. This is when you're suddenly at de facto C level. So you are the chief technology officer, or you are the director of quality assurance. You are the senior person in the vertical, and you're working with other people who are the senior people in their vertical. So if you're the CTO, your peers are people like the CIO, or maybe the COO or the CFO, all these C-level executives. The director of quality assurance, other people might be the director of design or the art director, people who share your level but do not share your expertise. The biggest challenge at this level, in my opinion, is working on a team, because you will be put on ad hoc teams with other folks at your level to solve problems by people like the enterprise manager, by people like the business and unit managers. They'll say, yeah, we got to solve this problem, go solve it. And being able to successfully participate in those types of meetings must somehow coordinate with other people's function. I mean, not only does that take a lot of time away from you managing your own vertical, it also puts you in an interesting challenge, as I call it, the little, the tug of war. The tug of war is when you've got 3 or 4 or more peer level managers and they don't all agree. And we know that, right? We've seen that. We've seen that in our own lives. What do you do when the art director, the director of quality assurance, the director of engineering, and the director of studio production all have 4 different opinions? So if you have that role, are you in a position, do you feel like you could step up and go into that role and actually help coordinate that? Do you have that skill? If you don't, those are skills that we have to learn. Those are skills that we have to develop. And then the other piece is, not only do you have to work now suddenly with that communication at the peer level, you will be for the first time probably communicating up and managing your boss in a way that you have never done before. Here's what I mean by that. So at that senior level, the person above you could very well be the studio head. Could very well be the most senior person in the business. And they are relying on you exclusively, extraordinarily closely, that not only will you deliver on the metrics and elements in your organization, but the information you give them is something that they can then share external to the organization. And it may be the very first time that the words that you say and the information you get from your people suddenly is very, very public, being used to make very, very important decisions around capital allocation or around the strategic direction of the organization. But here's where it gets extra challenging for you, and then we're going to wrap up on this slide and take our break. At this level, how many levels of subordinate manager are between you and what's actually going on? 2, 3, 4? Absolutely. It just really depends on how big the organization is, right? So who has the truth? Who has the truth? Who has or as we say in the military, who has the ground truth? Who knows what's really going on in the organization? Maybe the people on the ground. How do you get that information? Do you want it? Do you need it? How well do you trust your subordinate supervisors to give it to you? Have you built a community of trust so that they are telling you that they're comfortable bringing you both good and bad news? And then here's the thing, if you're that functional head and we'll just say it's QA, right? You're the director of quality assurance. You've got some quality assurance managers under you. Under them are some quality assurance supervisors. Then there's some quality assurance testers. You bring all these folks together. Are they all exhibiting that behavior? Are they all bringing you that information you need? as you think about being a leader, as you think about moving up into that leadership role, one of the things that really is important is when you're looking at tasks, when you're looking at role jobs and things that you are doing each day, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, should I be doing this? Is this something that is really important? Am I the only person who can do this? And I didn't say, can I do this better than everyone else? That was a great comment, by the way. That's exactly on the money. It's not a question of whether you can do it better. Of course you can do it better. I mean, absolutely guarantee you can do it better. One of the things you have to be able to do as you move into these leadership roles is you have to be able to accept that you can't do it all. You have to get work done through other people. And as you get work done through other people, sometimes that means you're going to tell people to do things and they may do it differently than you would. Didn't always say that they're going to do it worse, that they're going to do a terrible job with it, but they may come to a different solution. And that solution may or may not feel exactly great to you because it may be a little bit different. But it's important that you recognize that, because your time as you move into these senior roles is going to be incredibly constrained. You're going to have so much to do. So I see some nods. So much to do. And then if you can pass some down to someone else, it does two things. First, it frees up some of your time. Yeah, you actually have time to do stuff. But it also does something very important. It starts to develop the people who work with and for you. You know, if you have a task that you think, hey, this is my task, right? I should be doing this. I could do this. But man, I can delegate this down to maybe one of my top QA testers and give them a taste of what it's like to be a lead, what it's like to be a supervisor. Even better, if it's something like a presentation or a project, man, if you can bring that person into your boss's office and let them do that presentation after you've helped them, after you've prepped them, after you've made sure it's right. You're not going to throw them under the bus. You're not going to let them fail, right? You're not going to let them fail, but you give them a chance to get in there. Man, that is just great leadership right there. And you know what? I didn't go to the Yoda slide, right? This isn't about courage. What is it about? It's about doing the right things the right way. And that's what we're talking about. So let's hit a couple things here. So we're going to power through these because they're not totally applicable to everyone in these smaller companies. This transition, when you move from that C-level or director level role to actually owning a business, owning the business unit, this means you're probably responsible for profit and loss. So you own the product, you own the output, you're accountable to investors or to a chief executive for it. Candidly, this is incredibly satisfying. I have loved this role. I have had this role a couple times. It is amazing. You absolutely have significant autonomy. And it's the first time I've really talked about that, because you also have significant and limitless accountability. So that autonomy is great, but it comes with accountability. And it changes. You have to think about things differently because you're not thinking about, up until now, you've spent your whole time thinking about, can we do something? And maybe how should we do it? It's about technical execution, right? Can we do it? Can we do it technically, professionally, economically? Now you're changing it. Now you're thinking, should we do it? Does this even make sense to do? You're putting a strategic hat on. Does this even make sense for us? Can we make money doing it? But it also exposes you for the first time to what I think is one of the really significant risks. So I told you I was a corporate counsel for many years, and I've been a chief financial officer as well. And in those roles, I've had a chance to counsel people who were effectively business managers who at least owned games and were responsible for P&L on games. And one of the challenges is, we talked about what you value. Would you think about what you value when the CFO talks to you and says, hey, I need you we've got to talk about some of these things in your budget. Do you value that? Is that important? Do you understand that? Can you understand why that might be important to the organization? Same thing when the lawyer comes in and goes, man, hey, I love all this, but I think that's a little too close to, that Zynga trademark. I know you love that name, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable using it. I mean, you just throw up your hands and say, oh man, the damn lawyers. I hate those people. They're crazy. They're always in my way, right? I mean, I hear that a lot. I heard that a lot as a corporate attorney. Or do you go, you know what? I get it. Why do I want to expose the organization to that much risk? Corporate attorney, thank you very much for helping me out, keep me out of trouble. So let's move on to the next one. We're going to talk only very quickly. This group manager one, it means you have a bunch of organizations reporting to you, a bunch of teams reporting to you, all of whom have P&L responsibility. Again, not necessarily entirely relevant, But the big issue here might be one of what I would describe as capital allocation. When you have 3 or 4 units reporting to you and each one of those has a profit and loss, you have to decide how you're going to deploy capital, how you're going to deploy money, how you're going to invest in them for the biggest possible return to deliver that ROI. Again, a little outside the scope of kind of where this talk may go, but that's a really big deal and a huge skill to get. And let's move on to the last one, this enterprise manager one, because I do think it's relevant. So first of all, this is your boss's boss's boss, or maybe just your boss in a small enough organization. This is the person who owns, at the end of the day, the outcomes. And when I mean the outcomes, I actually mean all the outcomes, the organizational outcomes, whether you win or lose, whether you go on and sign all those really cool deals, or whether, like our friend Mr. Bruner, you end up having 90 employees laid off. Right? This is the person who is the buck stomps here, so to speak. This person's role is not tied up in day to day. This is all about long-term thinking. It's all around vision. It's all around strategy. It's what products should we make? It's what genres should we be on? It's what platforms should we go to? Where can we find blue ocean that can help us make some money? But you know what that person has to do? They have to let go. I can't sing it, but you already hear it in your head. You got to let go of what? Of the day-to-day operations. And here's something else interesting, and it was something very powerful to me when I was at a previous company and didn't quite have this role, but was close to it, is the idea that every person that this person hires probably wants their job. Let me say that again. So when you're a CEO, or if you're the top executive, and you may find this elsewhere, you have to put together a team of people. There's a good chance every one of those people on that team, from a chief operating officer, a chief technology officer, actually think they think that they're a better CEO than you. And that's okay. That's how it works. Because you've got to be comfortable at that level. You've got to be comfortable enough in your own skin to hire people who are high performing, high potential, even competitors to you. So that's enough on that one. We're going to touch on this a little bit more on small businesses, because this is really another place I want to go. Let me see if I got it here. Hang on. Oops. There we go. So the question is, what do I do with all this stuff for my small studio? What do these passages all mean? And candidly, it really only falls into a handful of passages for you. And you're probably going to doing a lot of these all at the same time. A lot of different roles. It really comes down to you have to get comfortable with this managing others role more than anything. This first transition. We spent probably 30 minutes on it, so we're not going to hit it again. But at the same time, you have to turn around and be an enterprise manager or a business manager. You've got to be setting strategic direction. You've got to be thinking about the long-term destination of your organization. And you've got to be comfortable working with outsiders like venture capitalists, outsiders like angels, outsiders like publishers, the people who bring you the money. Because without the money, you don't have that organization. The other piece you have to be comfortable with, and this is probably the scariest for a startup founder, and I live with this every day, is I can't be everywhere at once. Because I know in my heart of hearts, I could do everything better than everyone else, right? We think we could do that. I'm kind of guilty of that sometimes because I think I'm pretty smart. So I should be able to do a lot of good stuff. But, I can't do all the QA. I can't do all of the design. I can't do the wireframing. I certainly can't do the concept art. Fortunately, I'm no artist, so that doesn't bother me so much. What I have to be able to do, and since I've started my company, my biggest thing I've had to do is let go of day-to-day operations and get comfortable being out on the road doing sales, being out on the road doing business development, being out on the road talking to people and saying, I've got this cool thing and I can help you, and I think you have a problem that I can solve. So let me help you solve your problems, because that'll make us both happy. You'll get your problem solved and I'll get paid. And those are great things. It sounds a lot like Firefly, doesn't it? Do the job, get paid. It is exactly the same thing, minus the gunplay. And the horses and the cool spaceships. Okay, it's nothing like Firefly. Sorry. Sorry. All the good. Anyway, good enough. It is what it is. But it's true. These are the things, the challenge that you have to deal with is you've got to kind of do, if you're going to be this small studio head, you got to do all this at the same time. You've got to be able to set strategic direction and switch around and do coaching. And switch around and maybe own one of the verticals, because if it's a small enough studio, you just might be the CTO too. And so you've got to be able to jump between those roles. But now you kind of know how. So power through the break reel here because we already did it. So let me tell you what we're going to do next over this next probably 20, 30 minutes. So I believe that it's important that we not just talk in theory about what these things are, right? These skills, this value, these knowledge, how we spend our time, and how they're different at each passage, how they're different in each of these roles. But I want to go further and talk about very specific examples out of the day-to-day, out of what it's like to be at a company, and what these examples do, and how you approach these examples. And I've kind of got them in the order. I've kind of got them in the order of how you encounter them. And so this first one, that little flow chart, and you don't need to read the flow chart. The flow chart is about recruiting, because you can't do anything without people. And so I want to tell you a little story about recruiting, because recruiting, in my mind, is one of the things that is both broken and is one of the things that if we got better at and got right, and you are the ones that are going to do that, not me. You're the ones that are going to do that. As you learn these new transitions, will make all of our organizations better. So very, very long time ago, I had a chance to interview for a very senior role in a studio. I flew out to the location, spent the day in interviews. I thought the interviews went really well. HR came back and told me the interviews had gone exceptionally well. I only had one interview to go with, and that person was the chief executive officer of the studio. This studio was inside a much, 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 much larger organization, one of the big publishers. And so I sat there, and at the end of the day, CEO walks in and says, hey, why are you here? And I say, well, I'm here for this senior role, blah, blah, blah. I had a day of interviews. I think it looks interesting. It's an interesting fit with the skill set. I got my spiel down. He goes, no. I mean, I don't understand. Why are you still here? I told HR at lunch that we weren't going to fill this job. Okay. So why do I tell you that story? Why is that important? How does that fit into this? By the way, that's funny. You can laugh at that. I've enough years have passed that it doesn't hurt. And even though by the time I got out of there, everyone had left, including HR, and so I just had to drag my bags down the street until I finally found a cab to get to the airport. But that's okay. That's okay. Why do I tell you that story? I tell you that story because it falls into our concept of these transitions. There are people in that organization. There are people in that organizations who probably owned that process, but somehow they missed the boat on what the value, because the value might be you value job candidates. They missed the boat on how they address time and what they spend their time on. Their time might be on, they were busy. What was their time? How are they spending their time? Getting job candidates to come in. How should they have spent their time? Coordinating with the chief executive on what jobs the chief executive wanted to fill, right? There's a mismatch. There's these mismatches, right? And those are important. Those are the things that we have to catch, because we know recruiting has all these troubles, right? You got the black hole of submitting your resume. That's useless. The job descriptions, you'd have to be Superman. Nothing like the job descriptions that say 15 years of experience with Swift, right? And a programming language that's 3 years old. For those of you who don't know, the keyword searching, the sense of even if they make you, even if they want to interview you, they don't really want to interview you. They want to bring you in and get free work from you, right? They want you to come in and do some free consulting. So why do I tell you all that? Why is all that important? It's because as you look ahead to the roles that you have as a senior leader, these are the kind of challenges you're going to come up with, and these are the kind of challenges that I expect you, and you should expect yourself, to stand up and challenge. The potential practices, the challenge. How do you these are going to be your employees. These are going to be the folks that work for you. If you're a senior leader, do you want them to go through this process? Do you want them to have that experience? Is that okay for you? And so that's the challenge I put on you as you think about these transitions, as you think about going through them. So let's look at the next one. The next one's worse. So this is hiring. This is the hiring process. I bring this up because if recruiting is broken, hiring, if not entirely broken, is at least the way we set up all of our employees to fail through the hiring process. Now, how do we do that? And why is that important to you as a new supervisor, as a new manager? So as you think about your time budget, what you have time for, how important is it for time with new employees for onboarding? If you're a new supervisor, if you're a new leader, where does that fall? Is that more important than the Trello tasks that you have? Maybe. When you think about the work skills you have, the work skills you have that you should be developing. We talked about work skills as one of the most important things that has to change as you move through the organization. You know, as an individual contributor, you don't have to think about this, but as a brand new leader, if you've got new employees starting, how important is coaching? How important is training? How important is the delegation of coaching and training? Maybe you shouldn't do it. Here's a crazy idea. Maybe you should find someone on your staff who has a passion for it, who's got that sense of organization, and you put them in charge of it. You've just done two things. You've kept it off your plate, yay. You've just elevated a subordinate. Now to your trainer. What are they getting the chance to do in that instant? Oh, wait, they're getting a chance to signal that they might be ready for promotion. Remember what I said the most important thing is? I got to get signals that these people are ready for the next step. It's a powerful signal. You, as a supervisor, can send those signals. Or I should say this, you can help your subordinates send those signals. You can create the opportunities to send those signals. At the same time, solve this problem of onboarding new people. I love this because this entire form is nothing but documentation. Make an offer, all paperwork. Sign the agreement, offer. Get ready, which is more paperwork. Complete remaining paperwork. Checklist, it's all paperwork. Finally, you settle them in, and the first line is workplace health and safety. We have literally told them nothing about how to do their job, all the way to the end of this checklist. And I assure you, the employee, your new employee, what they really care about is figuring out how to do their job. Because that's what they want to do. They literally just took a new job. They want to do that job well. I have never encountered an employee who started a new job and on their first day wanted to do a bad job. So as the supervisor, as the leader, as the manager, is this your job? When you think about your day, is this where you put time? Is this where you have to value this process, or value at least this last part of the process? But now I got something a little scary to tell you about this. As a new manager and supervisor, you actually have to value the whole process. Yeah, I make a little bit of fun about the paperwork. I make fun about all the administrative stuff, but that has to be important to you too. When the packet gets dropped off and it's this thick, and you're the one that has to get them to sign everything and read through the healthcare and fill out the paperwork and fax in the NDA and all the other pieces, man, that stuff is really important. It starts their pay. It starts their healthcare. It starts their coverage under the disability plan. You've got to do all that, and it's got to be important to you. And it's got to be important to you as a supervisor. Even though I even make fun of it because, holy cow, look at all of that. Wow, that's nuts. Okay? So what are we back to? We're always coming back to the same things. How do you spend your time? What skills do you have? What do you value? Here's the other one on this one. How many of you think you have to answer this, it's a rhetorical question, comfortably have the skill to onboard new employees? Oh, wait a second, that's kind of new. How many of you felt you got, you think about this, how many of you got, put it in your head, got onboarded well at new businesses? Hello, Retro Team. I'm waving at the Retro Team. We had this discussion. The answer was none. Is that correct? Not heads? Yeah, not heads on that. So do you have the skill to onboard someone successfully? If not, where do you go and get it? Is there a checklist? Is there HR? So it always comes back to those three pieces, right? It always comes back to those in all of these. So let's take a look at the next one that's coming up. So this one, it can be relevant for your new employees. It can be relevant for you as a new supervisor and leader. This is my chart of value destruction. I call it the chart of value destruction because, and it's a little hard to see, this comes from a great book called The First 90 Days by a guy named Michael Watkins, Harvard University. You can grab a screenshot of it. It'll be available. It talks about new employees. On your x-axis is just a time series in months. The y-axis starts at 0 and is labeled contribution. As you go down, you're actually just consuming resources. You're actually not producing anything. And on this, it takes an average of 3 to 4 months to even begin generating value for the organization. And it can take as much as 6 to 7 months after a transition before you've actually done enough work to actually break even. Yikes. So there's two things here that you got to take away from this. The first is, how does this apply to me in my first day as a supervisor, either in a new business or a new role? So the first thing you got to do in that, man, why did they hire me? Do you know why? Do you know why you were made a supervisor? You should know that business reason. You should be able to articulate it because that's your mission. That's your mission description. Why did we put a supervisor over this department? You know why? Because we had like 6 people in it and they were kind of team managing and they were doing a crappy job and they were spending too much money and they weren't getting their Trello tasks done. And so I needed to put someone in charge to make sure all that happens. Great. Great. Thank you, manager. Thank you, supervisor. Now I totally know what I have to do. I have to stop spending as much money and I have to deliver Trello tasks. You are now, candidly, a better supervisor than most of your peers in that instant. You now know more, right? It's true. It's true. If you can't articulate your reason for being there in a couple sentences, you're probably making a mistake. The next thing I think you have to do is you have to kind of show your work a little bit. What I mean by that is if you've been kind of, especially if you're new to a company, and this isn't about like bragging on who you are, but being able to articulate why you're there and what particular talents and skills you're bringing to the table. That will help your peers. That will help your peers fit into you and work with you better. The other thing you got to do is figure out how to communicate. Every organization has its own communication style. Sometimes it's email, sometimes it's Slack, it might be Discord. Maybe you just use Post-it notes. Whatever it is. Some organizations are meeting heavy, very meeting heavy. Some never have a meeting, right? You better figure that out before before you get up on your first day of work and you set 7 meetings, and that's more meetings than the organization has had in the last 30 days. You might want to know that. That's really important because you want to fit in. You also want to sit down with your boss. Why do you want to sit down with your boss? Well, what do you want from me, boss? What do I got to do? What's a win to you? Tell me what a win is. Because if you're going to be successful, you have a question? Oh, because if you want to win, what is a win? Because if you're going to be a successful supervisor, I think I mentioned this earlier, right? The success you have in an organization is almost entirely determined in the transition when you move from one to the other or when you're coming new into an organization. Yeah, you can recover from a bad transition, but it will take time. And so the question is for your boss, what's a win to you? Because you know what you want to do? You want to deliver some now. You want to find some small ones now that you can shard off, that you can deliver a momentum for. And at the same time you're doing that, you don't want to do too much. You don't want to go too fast. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You don't want to try to promise more than you can deliver. That's all the first thing. That's that first big tranche. But what's the other piece to that? Everything I just said implies to brand new employees that have just joined your department. They all want that information. They maybe don't know they need to ask it. They don't know they need to ask it, so you got to tell them. You got to say things like, hey, here's why I hired you. Hey, here's how we do business. If you've got issues, bring them to our morning stand-up. You know what is a good win for me? Man, if you could just clean up that Trello board that looks like a disaster, that would be great. You think you could have that in 2 weeks? I'm going to get that for you by the end of the day. Well, you don't do that fast, but if I can have it this week, that's even better. Give the person a win. Give them something, and they deliver it, and you're like, that's great. And then when they jump in and they try to do everything, when they hand you a to-do, you're going to go to them, you're going to say, give me a plan for the next 30, 60, 90 days. And it has 310 items on it. You're going to say, thank you. Let's boil that down to 3. Let's get you 3 things that we know you will accomplish successfully and that matter to me as your boss or to your team or to the organization. Give those to me. So it's not just you need to do this for yourself, though you do. You also need to do it for the folks you have join your team. Okay? So now the next one, training. So I'm not going to put a lot of time on this one because I think, in my opinion, I've kind of already touched on it with time and value. Man, we are all so busy. Man, we are just all so busy. And man, I'm busy. And I'm not lying. The deadlines I have, my client deadlines are when I get paid. If I don't ship, I do not get paid. Not getting paid is very bad. It is what it is, right? I'm a small business. If I don't get paid, I don't pay other people, and they are very cranky. People really like to get paid, especially when they do work. So here's the thing, right? It's easy to put this off. It's easy to drop this down the value chain and say, you know what, I just don't have time this week to do it. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to lie to you and say, you know what, you have to do training no matter what, because you got to make your own decision. Every organization decides that. But I do like the quote at the top. I'm sorry you can't read it. It's a little too bright in here. It says, what if, it's got a CEO saying, what if we invest to train the employees and they leave? And it's got the guy next door saying, man, if we don't invest to train them, what happens if they stay around? Right? So you have a tough choice there. You got some trade-offs. And if you're a new supervisor or manager, this is your trade-off. This is your decision. And from a value standpoint, what you think is important, you get to exhibit that individually. If when people have problems and questions, you're able to set aside the time, remember time is so important, you set aside the time to sit down with them and talk them through something, people are going to hear that, they're going to see that, and they're going to mirror it. They're going to do it too. This is especially important if you're a manager of manager or a manager of other supervisors. They're going to see it and they're going to mirror it. And if that's a behavior you want mirrored, then that's a good thing to be doing. Okay? Okay. So our next piece here, I'm not going to tell you how to teach you how to have a meeting. I'm not going to do that because candidly there are more instruction guides on how to have a meeting than I could ever touch on. What I want to do is talk about skills, time, and value around meetings. I love this meeting. I will tell you this. I love this shot. I love this shot for a very simple reason. If a meeting has name tags at your space, it is guaranteed to be the worst meeting ever. There is, and that's just the truth. That is absolutely the truth. This guy's name down here is Greg Merritt. And I'm telling you, he's trapped too. You can see he can't get out. He can't get out. He just really needs to go use the restroom, but he can't get out. He's trapped. So why do I bring this up? So I think meetings are both the boon and bane of management. The biggest thing for me that I had to deal with at DuPont when I was customer service manager was how many meetings I had to attend. You're thinking, well, how many meetings did you attend? Well, let's see. I had the morning 7:30 production control call. Then I had the morning 8 a.m. production meeting. Then we had the 3:30 p.m. production meeting. We also had this 9 a.m. staff meeting. And my day ended about 4:30. So how many hours did I just spend in meetings? 3.5? Those were the standing meetings. Those were the daily meetings every single day in that factory. So I'm losing out of an 8-hour day about 3 hours and change on standing meetings. And you know what? I don't know how we'd have run the plant without them. I don't know how we'd have done it without them. They were absolutely essential. I don't think we had any unnecessary meetings. But then on top of that, you have other meetings. What meetings you have? Well, you got to meet with HR to talk about the rack and stack of your employees, right? Or you've got always something going on. You've got to meet with the art director on occasion because they've got questions, and the production manager's got questions. You're going to have ad hoc meetings with your boss when they walk into your office and sit down because they got an email from corporate they've got a question about. And now your day is 6 hours in, and I haven't even opened my email yet. And then you open your email, and you've got 100 unread emails. So the challenge for you as a leader, as a new rising leader, is how do you develop the skills to get through those meetings and make them effective so that they are value add. It's equally important if you own the meeting, if the meeting is yours. I'm not going to teach you how to do a meeting, but that is a skill that is worth learning. And for folks who have rising supervisors under you, that is a skill worth teaching, and it's quick. Agenda, right people, timeline, end the meeting on time, action items. Okay, now you're all meeting experts. I did that with like a sentence. But, not everybody gets that. And then what happens? Meetings just spiral in and last forever. Again, if a meeting is productive, it's worth every minute. The other thing to think about meetings as you are doing value is when you're deciding who attends the meeting. How important is this meeting? How important is all of these people's attendance? Because people are expensive. People are expensive. Okay? So that's all I need to say on meetings on that one. So now we come to my favorite one, because I am a CFO and I have an MBA, and so I love financial statements. That's okay. I'm weird. That's all right. I'm like the only one. I think these are amazing. I would spend like all day in financial statements. And you know what? That's a bad thing for me. That's a warning for me, because I would spend all day looking at financial statements because I think I can get a lot of value out of them. But as a senior executive, as a senior leader, I cannot. I have other people who should be doing that on my behalf and giving me advice on what it is. There are two things that I have to be very careful of, and this is, to me, one of the biggest. because I just could spend all day in these things. None of you, or most of you, probably do not know how to read in detail financial statements. As you think about moving your way up through the organization, this is one of those skills that is not negotiable. Again, we talk about skills and time and value. You cannot play if you cannot read an income statement. You cannot play if you do not know how the income statement of cash flows onto the balance sheet and changes the equity in the company. And I say it truthfully, it is not negotiable. You are not a serious candidate for promotion much beyond manager of managers, and candidly, maybe not into that. It is not a joke. At DuPont, the absolute scariest meeting of my entire life was about my first week there. Our facility accountant threw up a bunch of these things, and I literally understood not one word of it. So what did I do? Well, I knew it was important, value. I knew it was important. I had a personal value in it. And skill, I got to develop the skill. So what I got to do? I got to put the time. I got to put the time. So I sat down with the manager of finance. He taught me how to read them. He got me up to speed. Flip it around his side. Is it important that his senior managers, his peer level managers, can understand these? It sure is. Value. Is it worth his time to put into it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Go back and train. Go back and teach. Okay? Again, I'm not going to teach how to read these. That would take all day. Or an MBA. I threw this up there only because it's fun. I think it's fun. This is just how it all works. You can just follow the lines all the way through. You move from inventory to COGS down. Oh, yeah, it's great. I love it. I just love that. I could do that all day. Okay, budgets. Let's talk about budgets a little bit. This, again, we talk about what it takes to be a senior, and by senior, I just mean like a manager, manager of a inside a studio. This is now you are starting to be, this is why I call this an adulting. You're now adulting when you deal with a budget. And why is that? Because budgets are the lifeblood of serious organizations. And a serious organization is one that knows its market, that knows its product, and knows the dollars both in and out that tie all of that together. That's a serious organization. Here's the thing. If you own a department, if you're a supervisor of a team, do you know how much you're spending on the team? Do you know how much revenue you generate? How much cost savings you generate? How much money do you have to spend on CapEx to work your equipment? How much money have you spent on licenses for your JIRA licenses? Serious managers who understand how this works signal that they're ready for the next promotion. In fact, this is probably one of the most powerful signals. So what does it mean here? What it means for me is you need to understand when you come to the, to the senior levels and you say, I need 10 licenses on this software. I need 10 licenses. Man, I could do my job so much better if I had 10 licenses. I believe you. I believe you. License is $2,000 a copy. So you're asking for $20,000 recurring cost every year. Okay? What's the trade-off on that? What do I get from it? What's my return? Can you tell me that if I do this, you're going to be able to do, 25% more bugs without adding any more people? Okay, well, that sounds interesting because people are expensive. People are going to cost me $40,000 a year. Now you have my attention. Now I'm interested. If you come back to me and says, well, it'll be better. Okay, better is not a number. If you want to spend money, you have to give me a money number. You have to give me a number back. Okay? You cannot use qualitative guidance for quantitative outcomes or quantitative costs. Okay? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about budgets. And as you're moving into senior roles, these become more important for you. Uh-oh. I love the guy just chopping the, Xing the guy out in the corner. Sometimes we have to let people go. And here is a little clue about letting people go. As a supervisor, as a manager, that is your job. You're the one that's going to do it. You're going to get some help, either from HR or a senior manager. But when I think about letting people go, you're going to be making a couple big choices, and you've got a couple big actions to take. The first is, and I'm talking about termination. I'm not really talking about layoff. Sometimes the market just goes the wrong way. Every department's got to cut 20%. That sucks. You got to go have that conversation, but it's nobody's fault. What I'm talking about here is this is someone who isn't performing on your team. This is someone who's pulling down your performance, someone you want to replace with someone better. Well, man, there's some judgments in there, aren't there? You're having to make some tough decisions as a supervisor. So the question for you is, what standards have I set in advance that this person is falling short of? Are they qualitative? Are they metriced? Can I say you are doing half the bugs of the next slowest person? Can I say your code is being rejected in code review 80% of the time and the next engineer is only 20%? I don't know. I made this up. Those are terrible metrics. But I really have no idea. Because it could be different for every organization. And have I communicated that? Have I communicated that to people in advance? Have I said, hey, standard's kind of this, though candidly being the last of anything is never good. But let's say you make the decision. You make the decision. It's just time. It's just time to make to separate, to go our separate ways. So I want to tell you something that there's a lot of pressure as a manager. You know, you're going to have to present to your senior leadership. You're going to have to you're going to have uncomfortable conversations with employees. You're going to have to counsel and mentor. Your boss may be mad at you because you're not hitting your metrics. There is nothing like calling someone in and firing them for cause or for poor performance. Let's not call it cause. That's a little different. That is absolutely the most stressful moment because you are literally going to tell this person, hey, thanks for playing, but you're not any good. And I want to have you leave. And you're not going to say it that way, of course. You're going to do what you need to do. But that's effectively what you're saying. You're putting, let's face it, you are putting someone in, someone comes to you, you have crushed your self-respect, you have crushed their person. They're going to have to walk out past all their friends carrying their laptop bag without the laptop because it's yours. And everyone's going to know. Here's the other thing. If you think it's stressful for them and it's always more stressful for them because they're being let go, here is the other thing. Terminating an employee is without a doubt one of the most high visibility things you can do as a supervisor. So again, not a layoff. So you're the only one acting today. Everyone will know about it at your peer level because probably have told them because you're going to tell people. All your employees will know, hopefully, after you do it, because that's the right thing to do. Everyone, and I mean everyone, will be watching how you handle the stress, how you deal with this person, how you handle when they burst into tears in your office or they throw your paperweight at you. I've had both of those things happen because I've let go some people. Also had the death threat and the threat, and I get the threat of lawsuit. That's just natural. Don't let that bother you. Everyone's going to sue you. It's okay. In the end, they almost always sign the release. They almost always take the severance, and they almost always go away. But put yourself in that position, right? Put yourself in that position when you sit down. You bring them in, and you've made the decision. The decision's a good one. It's supported by everyone on your team. It's supported by your management. It's supported by leadership. Now you're having that conversation with them, and now you're going to have to escort them out. How did you handle that stress? How did you deal with it? How did you work with HR? This is a powerful moment. It's a powerful moment also for you because it signals whether you are ready for the next step because as you move up through the organization, the decisions don't get any easier. They never get any easier. The choices get more and more difficult. One of the terms you will hear sometimes at the very highest level is you run into what are called wicked problems. If you've never heard the term a wicked problem, that is one without an obvious solution where either choice presents material, notable downsides. As an individual contributor, you probably don't encounter those very often. As a director of QA, yeah, you might. Because do you work your team extra triple overtime? Do you hire more people, but you're going to blow your budget, or do you move the ship date? That's a wicked problem because we don't always know the answers. Okay, let's move on to our next couple things here. This next one is probably one of my favorite ones. I love this one. And we're all getting near the end of this section. So I don't know whether you can see it. I've got up there in the left corner, Chief Financial Officer and all the things that Chief Financial Officer cares about. Chief Information Officer, all that they care about. Human Resources, all they care about. And then I got my lawyer here in the corner. It says, the best thing about being a lawyer for a gigantic multinational entertainment corporation is shutting down Etsy accounts and suing kids on YouTube for singing other people's songs. So a little bit of joke in that, but the point is, this really brings us to one of my last things, at least for this. Then we're going to jump into some myths, and then we're going to drop into questions. So as you move up through the positions, you will have opportunity to work with other highly skilled senior people like the chief financial officer, like the chief information officer. These folks are not necessarily in your day-to-day. They are not necessarily aware of how you do your job. They may know nothing about the game industry. I mean, do you think CFOs at big studios know much about video games? Do they even play video games? Maybe not. What they are is great CFOs. What they are is great in their particular vertical. So the question comes back to value. Can you value the opinion of folks like this when they come in, even though they may not necessarily know everything about what you do? Then do you have the skill to communicate to these senior people what you do and why it's important so that the advice you get from them is actually actionable? Can you actually use that advice? Because you know what, if you're able to explain to the CFO what your needs are, you're actually going to be in a great position to get the kind of feedback from that CFO. These are smart folks. It takes a long time to be a chief financial officer. A lot of degrees, a lot of experience. They can bring you a lot of value as a leader. I mean, lawyers are I make fun of them, right? But lawyers are absolutely essential. Human resources, absolutely essential. As a leader, you manage people. Human resources are how they help you stay out of trouble. They help you bring people in. They help you move people out. You should be joined at the hip with your HR manager. But you know what? They don't necessarily talk your language if you're the art director. So can you find that? Can you bring that together? Do you have the skills to bring that up? Okay. So a couple of the last things. So we've got about 18 minutes before I'm going to wrap this up, but I'm going to do it a little bit quicker because I want to open up just a couple questions. So a couple myths, and we're just going to tap on these quickly. Mostly what I've heard when I've promoted people to supervisor for that first job is they have this sense that they now are kind of in charge. And there is a certain truth of it, that they have all this authority and power and freedom and control, and that someone's going to teach me how to leverage it. Not necessarily the case. So let's talk about the myths. So the first myth is, I'll use the same skills as before. Man, after this talk, if you haven't got this down, I don't know what to say. Stay in your individual contributor role. We know this, right? We have just foot stomped this over and over. If you are moving into a leadership role, if people beneath you are moving into your leadership roles that you're picking, their skill sets have to change. And you've got to make the decision. What do you keep? What do you have to gain that's new? And what do you discard? Remember, we saw that slide. That was a great slide. So we've beat on this one to death. And again, of course, what got you here won't get you there. The next one is around power. Around power. And absolutely, if you're a supervisor, if you're a lead, you have a certain amount of power. You might be able to set work hours. You decide what people do. But the truth is your authority doesn't guarantee that you'll actually have what's described as influence. Influence is much more important than authority. And the question is not really whether you can get your employees to do things you need as a lead. Because you know what? If they work for you, they're going to do what you tell them to do. You know, if you put the JIRA ticket in and say, please do these 10 tasks, they're going to do those tasks. The more important and more powerful question for you is, can I influence other supervisors, other leads, other managers to do what I would like them to do because it would make my job better? There might be a case where, man, if just the art team would just make this one change to their files, it would make my job in production so much easier. So how are you going to influence? Do you have the influence to get the director, the art director, to make that change, to add that little thing? So it's a question about, can people see you? Are you visible? Do you have a visible role in the organization? Do you stand up when there's opportunities to stand up? And then what are you known for? How do you get known? What are you being looked at for? What do you bring to the organization? Remember we talked a little while ago about figuring out kind of like why you were hired, why this role is open, what hole you're filling. That's what you should be known for. You should be known for the thing that you're fixing or solving. If you're not known for that, there might be a mismatch. Okay, let's talk about freedom. You definitely have a lot more freedom as a supervisor. I find this initially a little bit scary because you might find yourself like, what do I do all day? What do you mean I don't have any JIRA tasks. Well, yeah, you don't have any. You're the manager. Well, I've always had JIRA tasks. I've had JIRA tasks for 14 years. There are no manager JIRA tasks? No. You come up with your own tasks. You set your own direction. You get vague things like, we're going to build a really amazing game and ship it on this platform in 14 months. And now you're the art director, so get that done for us, right? We're going to need some art for that, so get on it. And that's it. That's your guidance. No one's going to break that out into JIRA tickets for you. That's scary. So you get more free time, and if you can delegate tasks to your direct reports, you'll get a little more free time. But at the end of the day, you are the, at least in your area, you are the decision maker. And so you own your day. Okay, so we want a couple other myths, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Always have control. So I found this at DuPont very much so. I was telling some folks that I copied when I first got to DuPont. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was suggested that I look to a guy named John, who was the engineering manager, and say, well, do what John does. John always looks like he has his act together. So it took me 3 or 4 years, but I discovered something very important. John did not have his act together. Not even kind of, but boy, he looked like he did. His slides were always organized. He was always on top of his data. But he struggled. His organization struggled with a whole bunch of key metrics, yield, and a whole host of other things. It was a challenge. But he never let it show. He never let it get to him. And he always stayed self-assured even when things were kind of broken. I want to foot stomp this a little bit. Again, everyone is different. Humans are different. Your emotional response is going to be different. And I do believe to some extent you have to lead from a position of authenticity. You know what I mean? I am not going to lead the way a Marine platoon commander is going to lead. That's not going to be my style, right? Look at me. I look like a Marine? No, it's not going to happen. So I got to have to develop my style. But you have to adapt your style just a little bit because people look to you for leadership, and freaked out leaders do not inspire confidence. They do not make you comfortable. And so things are going to go wrong. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make more mistakes. Then you'll make even more mistakes. Okay. Mistakes happen. Move forward. Move forward. Okay? Then we're coming here to the last one. This is the biggest. I don't know that I've ever had any leadership training per se or manager training. DuPont did a nice job of always hooking me up with mentors and coworkers who are helpful. I think that is a quick cheat and is actually really, really, really useful. I personally find a lot of the leadership in quotes, training to be pretty awful and pretty useless. That's one of the reasons we're having this talk, right? We're having this talk because at the end of the day, I don't like leadership training because we know what leadership training looks like, right? It's the Yoda slide. Be courageous and nice and democratic and wonderful and sweet, and you'll be Yoda. And then the Sith will kill all your Jedi. Right? We know that doesn't work. It's terrible. That's why we focus on simpler things. We focus on the things that we know we can control, the things we can control being, right? What skills do we develop? Do we have the right skills for every slot? What time am I spending on? How do I spend my time? And what do I think is important? And how those change at every passage, right? That's where we started this presentation. It's where we're wrapping up the presentation. It's just back to those 3 fundamentals, and those fundamentals apply no matter what kind of supervisor, leader, manager, executive you are. I think you can be a very effective leader and be high-strung. I think you can be a very effective leader and be an introvert. I think you can be a very effective leader and not like to hold meetings. Absolutely. I've worked with those 3 people. I know who they are. And they can be very effective leaders. Because what's it come down to, an effective leader? Being an effective leader is ultimately getting work done through other people that you could not do on your own. Whether you're a supervisor or whether the chief executive officer. So folks, we are now coming down to the end. So really it's this last takeaway, and you cannot read that at all. Man, it looks fine on my screen. Okay, so my takeaways are, can you identify what level you're in and what passage you are either in or coming up on? So what role do you have? What passage are you in? Inside that passage, are you exercising the right time? Are you using time the right way? Are you using skills the right way? Are you valuing the right things? If the answer to that question is not an absolute yes, what do you got to stop doing? Remember the slide about getting rid of, some stuff's got to go. Some stuff's got to go. Every time you make a transition, every time you move through a passage, something has to give. Give it away. Get rid of it. And then the last piece here is just, what do you have to start doing? What are you not doing that you need to do? Okay, so we're coming here near the end. I will just basically say I am incredibly grateful that you have sat here for 2 hours and listen to me talk about my own kind of pet peeves on leadership, as well as kind of how I think of transitions. I wish all of you the best in this. I am incredibly excited to think about all the things that you might get to go do as new leaders in the game industry, and that we might laying the groundwork for the game industry maybe not being a place where our leaders are compared to the eye of Sauron. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.